A child born deaf heard a whisper for the first time. A machine designed a drug molecule and is about to test it in the human body. A particle collided inside the Large Hadron Collider and did something the standard model says shouldn't happen. And Google wrote a $40 billion check to a company it directly competes with. That's one day, April 25th. So let's start at the smallest scale imaginable, subatomic, because what happened at CERN is one of those findings that sounds esoteric until you realize what it actually implies. The LHCb experiment reported a 4 sigma anomaly in something called an electroweak penguin decay. It's named for the shape of a diagram, which kind of looks like the actual bird. What matters, though, is this. B meson, which is a subatomic particle, decayed into 3 other particles. Physicists measured how often that happens and at what angles. Both measurements disagree with what the standard model predicts. The odds of this being a random fluctuation? 1 in 16,000. Now, particle physicists require 5 sigma. That's 1 in 1.7 million odds before they'll call something an actual discovery. So this is preliminary. Anomalies have vanished before. But what makes this one unique is a separate experiment at the LHC, CMS, published independent results last year that point in the same direction. 2 different detectors, same deviation, and the LHCb team has already collected 3 times more data since the dataset they analyzed, which only ran through 2018. Upgrades planned for the 2030s will multiply the statistical power by 15. Okay, so why should you care about B mesons decaying in funny ways? Because the standard model is the most successful scientific theory that humans have ever constructed. It describes everything from how your phone screen lights up to how stars burn. If it's incomplete, if there's something operating at the fundamental level of reality beyond what it describes, that rewrites the foundation underneath every branch of physics, and possibly chemistry, and possibly biology. The last time we discovered physics beyond the existing framework, it gave us transistors, lasers, MRI machines. We don't know what a crack in the standard model leads to. That's the point. It leads somewhere we literally cannot imagine yet. And the timing carries a specific weight. There's a bottleneck in particle physics called the charming penguin complication, a calculation so mathematically intense that it pushes against the limits of current theoretical techniques. It is the main reason that this anomaly might still have a mundane explanation. And the tools emerging right now, the same kind of AI-driven analytical systems that compressed protein structure prediction from decades to hours with AlphaFold, are beginning to enter the particle physics pipeline. The instrument that detected this anomaly is mechanical, magnets and sensors built over years. But the intelligence that will determine whether it represents new physics is increasingly computational. If AI compresses these impossibly hard calculations the way AlphaFold compressed protein folding, then the gap between anomaly and discovery stops being gated by decades of theoretical labor. The 5 sigma bar stays the same. The speed at which we reach it does not. So I'm bringing this up now because every story that the Century Report covers is about exactly this kind of accelerating progress. This is a great example of where we are, this space of being on the cusp of constant discovery. Okay, shifting away from the smallest particles to the human body, because 3 medical stories landed in the same 24-hour window, and together they describe something I don't think most people have fully absorbed. First, the FDA approved the first gene therapy for genetic hearing loss. Regeneron's Otarmony. In clinical trials, 16 of 20 children showed hearing improvement. 5 of 12 that were followed for at least 11 months achieved essentially normal hearing, including the ability to hear whispers without assistive devices. These are children who were born profoundly deaf, and then they could hear a whisper. And Regeneron announced that it will provide the treatment free to every eligible U.S. patient. Their chief scientific officer said it highlights, quote, our belief that the pharmaceutical industry can be a genuine force for good in the world. Close the quote there. Free. Not subsidized, not discounted, free for a gene therapy that restores hearing in children who were born without it. If you're a parent, stay on that for just a minute. A child who has never heard your voice, in a single treatment, they can hear you whisper. Second, Isomorphic Labs, the Google DeepMind drug discovery spinoff, confirmed that it's moving AI-designed drug molecules into human clinical trials. President Max Jederberg said that these molecules are engineered from computational protein understanding to be very, very potent at lower doses with fewer side effects. So that claim is specific because the AI understands how the molecule interacts with its protein target at a structural level. The drug arrives at the clinic already shaped to fit, like a key cut precisely for its lock, rather than filed down after years of trial and error. That is a fundamentally different approach to making medicine. Conventional drug design starts broad and narrows over a decade. Isomorphic claims computational understanding lets you start narrow. And if that holds in human trials, it changes what the word drug actually means. It changes how long the pipeline takes. It changes how many candidates fail. The timeline is later than CEO Demis Hassabis had originally predicted. He'd aimed for trials by the end of 2025, but they are happening. Real molecules, real patients, real data coming within the next 18 months. Okay, third item here. The FDA issued priority vouchers to companies working on psychedelics for mental health. Compass Pathways for psilocybin in treatment-resistant depression. Usona Institute for psilocybin in major depressive disorder. Transcend Therapeutics for methadone in PTSD, and they cleared the first ever U.S. clinical trial of an ibogaine derivative for alcohol use disorder, a compound class that had never been authorized for human testing in this country. Commissioner Macquarie indicated decisions on some psychedelic therapies could come as soon as this summer or fall. This follows the White House executive order on April 19th directing the FDA to expedite breakthrough therapy psychedelics. 6 days from presidential directive to regulatory action. Now pull back from those individual headlines here. Gene therapy that restores a missing human sense and is offered free. AI-designed molecules entering clinical trials built on Nobel Prize-winning protein science. And an entire class of psychiatric therapeutics, compounds that have been Schedule 1 for 50 years, receiving accelerated regulatory pathways for depression, PTSD, and addiction, all arriving in a single news cycle. If someone you love is battling treatment-resistant depression, and roughly 30% of people with depression don't respond to existing medications, the FDA just fast-tracked 2 separate psilocybin programs aimed directly at their condition. If a child in your family was born with OTOF-related hearing loss, a free gene therapy just became available that gave 5 out of 12 kids essentially normal hearing. If the isomorphic trials validate AI-designed drug precision, the next cancer drug or immunology treatment your doctor considers might be one that was computationally shaped to minimize the side effects that make treatment unbearable in many cases. This isn't someday this will happen. This is already entering the clinic. The distance between scientific understanding and the doctor's office is compressing right in front of you. And there's a deeper signal underneath these 3 stories. When the cost of understanding biology drops far enough, the bottleneck shifts away from can we build this therapy and towards who pays for its distribution and how fast can institutions adapt. Regeneron answered one version of that by giving the treatment away free. The FDA answered another by compressing regulatory timelines from years to months. Isomorphic is testing whether AI changes how medicines are designed in the first place. All 3 experiments are running simultaneously. Each one is pulling on a different constraint, and the constraints are loosening now. All right, let's shift away again. From biology to the economics of intelligence itself, because the money that moved yesterday reveals an organizational form that doesn't have a name really yet. Google announced that it will invest up to $40 billion in Anthropic. $10 billion committed immediately at a $350 billion valuation. Another $30 billion contingent on performance targets. This arrives days after Amazon committed $5 billion with a $100 billion cloud spending pledge from Anthropic back to them over the next decade. So Anthropic's 2 largest investors are now Google and Amazon. Google and Amazon are also Anthropic's 2 sole infrastructure suppliers, Google providing TPU chips, Amazon providing Trainium chips. And Google and Amazon both compete directly with Anthropic through their own AI models. Competitor, investor, and infrastructure supplier, all 3 relationships simultaneously with both cloud providers. This is not a partnership and it's not a rivalry, it's something else. An entanglement so deep that the word competitor really loses all ordinary meaning. Capital flows in, compute capacity flows back, and every gigawatt committed binds Anthropic's research trajectory more tightly to its investors' silicon roadmaps. Google's deal includes 5 gigawatts of TPU-based capacity over 5 years, combined with Anthropic's earlier Broadcom partnership for 3.5 gigawatts. The company's models will literally be shaped by the hardware that its investors build. And this entanglement emerged from real pressure. Fortune documented widespread user complaints about Claude Code performance just in recent weeks, with Anthropic ultimately publishing a detailed engineering postmortem acknowledging 3 separate missteps. Their statement to Fortune, this is a quote, "Demand for Claude has grown at an unprecedented rate, and our infrastructure has been stretched to meet it." Close that quote there. An OpenAI internal memo reported by CNBC claimed that Anthropic was operating on a meaningfully smaller curve than its competitors. The $40 billion addresses that constraint, but it addresses it by deepening dependency, not reducing it. The closest historical parallel might be early railroad finance, where the companies that built the rails also owned the freight companies, the land grants, and the coal mines. Those vertical entanglements got so deep that existing legal categories couldn't really even describe what they were. It took an entirely new body of antitrust and regulatory law. Anthropic, reportedly considering an IPO as soon as October, will force a disclosure regime designed for companies with identifiable competitors onto an entity whose primary rival are its primary investors and sole infrastructure providers. The SEC forms will need a new vocabulary. Bloomberg reports investors are eager to back Anthropic at $800 billion or more. The physical architecture of intelligence is being negotiated in real time, and the negotiation is producing organizations that have no precedent in any prior technology era. All right, shifting away again. 75% machine, 100% consequential. While Google was writing that check, it disclosed something about what's happening inside its own walls. 75% of all new code created inside Google is now generated by AI and reviewed by human engineers. 25% in October 2024, 50% last fall, 75% now. In 18 months, the ratio inverted. Humans went from writing most of the code to reviewing most of the code. CEO Sundar Pichai described a complex code migration completed 6 times faster with AI agents than engineers alone could have managed just a year ago. And this is happening everywhere. Snap disclosed 65% AI-generated code last month. Meta set 75% targets for some of their organizations. The trajectory at Google's pace puts the residual human-written fraction at craft-scale production within 2 years. Think about what that means for you if you write software. Your job title currently says engineer, but the work is migrating from production to supervision, from writing to reviewing, from making the thing to maintaining coherence across systems that machines compose. The closest analogy might be the shift from typesetter to editor in publishing, but it understates the stakes there. A typesetter's error was visible on the page. Code generated at 75% machine speed carries failure modes that propagate silently through dependencies. Amazon's AI code production outages, including a 6-hour website failure that led to mandatory senior engineer sign-off, shows what happens when review cadence falls behind generation cadence. And the token maxing data from last week found that engineers with the largest AI compute budgets produce twice the throughput at 10 times the cost, with code churn rates up to 9.4 times higher. More code, faster, at higher expense with more rework. Anthropic's own study found AI theoretically covers 94% of computer and math tasks, but performs only 33% in practice. The gap between what AI can generate and what organizations can safely absorb, that gap is where the next structural failures will emerge, and also where the next governance innovations will come from. Shifting away again here. One thread connecting the Google Anthropic deal, the AI-designed drugs, and the 75% code story. Capability is accelerating, and access to the most powerful forms of that capability is narrowing. Time published an analysis framing too dangerous to release as an emerging industry norm. 3 models from 2 companies, Anthropic's Mythos, OpenAI's GPT 5.4 Cyber, and GPT Rosalind, all released in April, all withheld from general public access. The restricted access list skews toward finance, defense, intelligence, and credentialed research labs. CISA, the federal cybersecurity agency, still doesn't have Mythos access, as we've covered the last couple of days. Public health agencies, educational institutions, open source security maintainers, simply not on the list. Peter Wildford of the AI Policy Network told Time that, quote, frontier developers are restricting access to their most capable models because they are genuinely worried about some of the capabilities these models have, close quote. And that's a credible reading, but there is another side worth holding alongside it. Epoch AI documents a 3 to 7 month diffusion timeline before open weight models close the capability gap. That window is temporary, by design, and during that window, the organizations with early access are overwhelmingly those whose positions depend on the current arrangement of financial, military, and informational infrastructure. The organizations absent, the ones whose mandates involve distributing capability broadly, they're the ones waiting. Both readings explain the same facts. Genuine safety concern and structural advantage accumulation aren't mutually exclusive. They can operate simultaneously, and in fact they have for most of modern civilization. And 3 to 7 months of compounding advantage in cybersecurity, drug discovery, and advanced reasoning reshapes the ground before the commons arrives. Whether that's a necessary cost of safety or an architecture of concentration, that answer depends on what the access lists look like 6 months from now. Okay, let's cover some quick hits from the release pipeline. Anthropic launched personal app connectors in Claude. You can now connect it to Spotify, Uber, Instacart, AllTrails, TripAdvisor, Audible, even TurboTax. Your AI can order your groceries and file your taxes. That's the agentic era arriving at the level of your daily errands. Browser Use released Browser Harness, which is an open framework for browser-based agent tasks with self-correction, part of the Open Browser project. And Mozart AI shipped Studio 1.0, a generative audio workstation with VST support. So this is AI-assisted music production that plugs into the tools that producers already use. Closing out for today. A previously deaf child heard a whisper. A particle misbehaved. A molecule designed by computation is about to enter a human body. A company wrote a $40 billion check to its own competitor. And 3 out of every 4 lines of code at one of the largest software organizations on Earth was written by a machine. Now very soon, watch for Isomorphic's trial data, because if AI-designed molecules actually show the precision that Jaderberg claims, the pharmaceutical industry's entire timeline economics change. Watch for whether the LHCb team publishes results from the 3x larger data set that they've already collected. Because 4 sigma with more data either becomes 5 sigma or it doesn't, and both outcomes reshape physics. And pay attention to who gets added to the restricted release access lists in the next 90 days. Because the composition of those lists is determining who benefits from the most powerful tools ever built. A whisper. That's all it takes to know the world just changed. See you tomorrow.